The Capitol's marble corridors buzzed louder than usual that Thursday afternoon. It was a Judiciary Committee oversight hearing, but no one expected fireworks. Not until Karoline Leavitt walked in. At just 27, she was the youngest press secretary in White House history, and already a symbol of Trump's unapologetic return. Wearing a navy blue fitted blazer with a small silver cross at her collar, she stepped into the hearing room, her heels clicking with a confidence that echoed louder than the murmur of aides and reporters. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, sat at the far end of the dais. Known for her firebrand liberal takes and viral sound bites, she had already raised eyebrows with her "don't try me" moments on TikTok. Her eyes tracked Karoline from the moment she entered. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. She had seen the clips. Karoline defending Trump on Fox, sparring with reporters, rallying the MAGA base. To Jasmine, she was just another script-reading puppet. Karoline didn't sit at the witness table. She stood, calm, prepared. She had been invited to testify on digital censorship in political communications. As she adjusted the mic, tension thickened in the air. "Ms. Leavitt," said Chairman Jordan, giving her the floor. Karoline leaned forward. "Thank you, Chairman. It's time we expose the coordinated suppression of conservative voices online, especially from this administration." Some Democrats rolled their eyes. She had spoken for less than 3 minutes when Jasmine leaned into her mic, flipping a pen between her fingers. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, voice syrupy smooth but laced with venom. "Before we waste more time with right-wing cosplay, who even are you?" The room froze. Her words sliced through the air like a blade dipped in sarcasm. A low gasp slipped from someone in the back. Phones lifted, recording. Even seasoned staffers looked up from their notes. Karoline didn't blink. Jasmine leaned back smugly. "Because as far as I know, the only reason you're here is to echo Trump's tweets in a skirt." Silence followed. Eyes turned to Karoline. Cameras zoomed in. The moment was hers. Sink or strike back. Karoline slowly placed her hands on the table. Then she spoke. "My name is Karoline Leavitt," she began, voice measured. "And I suggest you remember it, because after today, you won't forget it." The room exhaled audibly. Staffers whispered. Chairs shifted. But Karoline wasn't done. Her voice rose, not in volume but in command. "You want to know who I am, Congresswoman Crockett?" she said, eyes fixed on her like a laser. "I'm the daughter of a working-class family in New Hampshire. I put myself through college. I interned for the Trump White House at 21. I stood on debate stages, took the hits, and didn't flinch. And today, I speak for millions of Americans your party mocks, silences, and forgets." Gasps. Applause from the conservative side. Jasmine's smirk faltered. The camera captured every twitch. This wasn't just a reply. It was the opening move in a political clash that would rock the nation. Karoline's words hung in the air like a challenge too bold to ignore. The room remained frozen for a moment longer, until Jasmine let out a low, forced chuckle and leaned into her mic again. "Oh, so now we're doing inspirational biographies?" she said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "I asked a simple question, Ms. Leavitt. Didn't expect a Hallmark card." The liberal side of the room laughed lightly, but it didn't carry the punch Jasmine hoped for. There was a tension now, a current of unease, because Karoline hadn't just defended herself. She had seized the room. Chairman Jordan tapped his gavel. "Let's stay focused on the topic, please." Karoline didn't flinch. She shifted slightly, her fingers grazing the cross at her collar. It was subtle, almost instinctual. Her voice was steady as ever. "I'm here to testify on government and big tech collusion, Congresswoman. But if you want to make this about personality, go ahead. Just be prepared when I return the favor." Jasmine blinked. She hadn't expected the blonde Gen Z conservative to bite back with such composure. But Crockett was a fighter too, and she leaned forward, voice rising. "What I see is another Trump echo chamber. Y'all come up here dressed for war, but the only thing you're fighting for is the right to cry victim every time Twitter takes down a conspiracy theory." A ripple of laughter from her side. Karoline's lips twitched into a faint, sharp smile. Funny, she said coolly. The only thing being taken down is the truth, and it's your side that's afraid of it. Jasmine slammed her hand on the table. You don't know the first thing about truth. You've never been poor, never been ignored, never had your voice erased. Karoline's eyes flashed. Oh, I've been ignored, she said, stepping forward, her voice rising in temperature. Ignored by classrooms, networks, and institutions that called me too conservative, too young, or simply too white. You don't get to decide who's allowed to feel silenced, Congresswoman. That line sent shockwaves. Phones across the room buzzed, already live tweeting. Karoline Leavitt started trending. Representative Thomas Massey leaned in from behind Karoline, whispering, "Keep going. You've got them rattled." Jasmine sat up straighter, adjusting her nameplate like it might give her more leverage. So now you're the oppressed one? Girl, please. Karoline chuckled. You keep calling me girl like it's an insult. I'll wear that title proudly if it means not sinking into your brand of condescension. Even some Democrats paused at the line, too sharp to ignore, too precise to dismiss. Representative Matt Gaetz smirked in the corner. She's landing punches, he muttered under his breath. Karoline turned back to the panel. This hearing is about censorship, she said, reclaiming the narrative. And if this room wants to debate who deserves to speak, let's start with the millions of Americans who were shadow banned, throttled, and labeled dangerous just for supporting a former president. That's the real injustice, not who wears the better power suit. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. And what do you propose, Ms. Leavitt? That we let fake news run wild? That we platform hate and call it freedom? Karoline's voice turned sharp as glass. I propose we stop letting tech monopolies decide who gets to speak. I propose we stop acting like free speech is dangerous just because it makes you uncomfortable. Gasps. Applause. The hearing had officially exploded beyond its intended scope. This wasn't a testimony anymore. It was a battlefield, and Karoline had just taken higher ground. Chairman Jordan tried to pivot back to procedural order, but the air had already shifted. The fight was on, and Karoline Leavitt was just warming up. The committee room had seen decades of testimony, generals, CEOs, whistleblowers, but few moments had electrified it like the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt. This wasn't just generational tension, it was ideological war. One forged in institutions, the other sharpened online and in the trenches of 21st century media. Jasmine crossed her arms, the rhythm of the room slipping from her control. She was used to setting the tone, commanding headlines with a fiery phrase, but Karoline was different, unshaken, precise, trained in the fires of Fox prime time and MAGA rallies. And now, she stood center stage, commanding attention with nothing but a stare and a sentence. Karoline flipped open a binder and pulled out a printout. This, she said, lifting it to the cameras, is a copy of a direct message from Twitter's internal communications. It lists White House staffers requesting the takedown of a conservative journalist for violating no law, just for being inconvenient. She laid it on the desk. The room buzzed. Jasmine leaned forward. Where's that from? Karoline's smile barely moved. The Twitter files. You're welcome to read them, assuming you're not afraid of what they say. A few gasps. Representative Jerry Nadler scowled from across the dais. Let's not turn this hearing into a circus. Karoline turned toward him without missing a beat. With respect, Congressman, the circus started when the government told Silicon Valley who to silence. Laughter broke out, quiet but undeniable, from the Republican side. Even independents looked down, awkward smiles playing across their faces. Jasmine banged her pen on the desk. You're twisting everything. That's not censorship. That's moderation. Safety protocols. Karoline's tone didn't rise. That was her edge. She didn't shout. She sliced. Safety from what? From people who think differently? From criticism? Because if that's the new standard, then your side should have been deplatformed years ago. She pulled another sheet from the folder. This post wasn't removed, she said, voice cold. It accused Trump supporters of being domestic terrorists. That's still up. Meanwhile, users asking about vaccine side effects, gone, flagged, suspended. Jasmine's voice cracked slightly. You're playing victim while pushing disinformation. That's dangerous. Karoline nodded slowly. What's dangerous is using the word disinformation like a shield to silence everything you dislike. That's not science. That's control. Now the temperature shifted further. Chairman Jordan cleared his throat. Let the record show that Ms. Leavitt has entered Exhibits A and B into evidence. As the clerk collected the printouts, Karoline turned back to Jasmine, her voice dropping to a razor's edge. You asked who I was. I'm someone who isn't afraid to look you in the eye and say this system's broken. And your party helped break it. Jasmine stiffened. Karoline continued, relentless. You want to talk about power? You sit on this panel. You craft the narrative. But I have something you lost the minute you started dismissing half the country. I have clarity. I know who I fight for. That line hit harder than any policy stat. It wasn't just about platforms or politics anymore. It was about identity, about vision, about who was shaping the future. And at that moment, it was clear. Karoline Leavitt wasn't there to take part in the hearing. She was there to rewrite it. As Karoline sat down, her posture was effortless, but the silence in the room wasn't. Jasmine Crockett tapped her fingers rapidly on the desk, a beat of restrained fury playing in her knuckles. The hearing was slipping out of her hands, and that, more than Karoline's words, ignited her next move. I'm tired, Jasmine suddenly snapped into the mic, her voice louder than before. Tired of watching people like you come in here, flashing your cross and your Fox News resume like it makes you qualified to talk about real people. A murmur ran through the room. You speak like you represent the average American, Jasmine said, rising slightly in her seat. But you've spent more time getting your makeup done in a green room than standing in a food bank line. Don't pretend you know poverty, struggle, or discrimination. Karoline didn't move. I don't pretend, she replied softly. I remember. The tension escalated as Jasmine rose fully to her feet. Let me guess, she mocked. Small town girl, bootstraps, Republican savior fantasy. I've heard it before. But Karoline stood too, calm, spine straight. You've heard it, she said, but you never listen. Gasps. Jasmine shook her head, eyes narrowing. You're not here to testify. You're here to go viral. You want another Tucker segment, another MAGA fan cam. That's your America. Karoline stepped forward, her voice slicing through the static like a clean blade. You want to talk about performative politics? Look at your Instagram feed. You've built a brand off outrage. You film confrontation like it's currency. And now that someone's pushing back, suddenly it's unfair? Jasmine's lips parted, but no sound came. The room seemed to lurch. Chairman Jordan tried to intervene. Let's get back to the line of questioning. But the spectacle had taken on a life of its own. Karoline didn't stop. Her voice sharpened. You said I don't know discrimination. Let me tell you what I do know. Being a woman in politics who dares to speak conservative truth. I've been called a traitor to my gender, a puppet, a fascist, all before turning 30. That's not makeup, that's reality. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones lit up. C-SPAN's live stream numbers were spiking. Jasmine tried once more. You're still defending a man who separated families at the border. Karoline's eyes narrowed. And you're still ignoring the thousands of women raped on the way there because your policies made the border a disaster zone. Boom. The room shattered into half yells, gasps, and muffled protests. Chairman Jordan's gavel slammed again and again. Order! Order! But there was no going back. Karoline's line was already clipped and spreading online like wildfire. And in that moment, Jasmine, usually the one who weaponized viral moments, felt what it meant to be on the other side of the lens. She turned her face slightly from the cameras. Karoline remained still, measured, victorious, not with rage but with restraint. She didn't blink as Jasmine slowly sank back into her chair, her silence now louder than her words. On X, the hashtag #1. Who even are you trended #1 worldwide. And Karoline hadn't even finished speaking yet. The room never fully recovered from Karoline's last line. Jasmine Crockett sat with her jaw clenched, her hands flat on the desk, eyes unfocused. Her allies around her, some shaken, others embarrassed, shuffled papers, whispered to aides, or avoided looking in Karoline's direction. Karoline, by contrast, sat still and composed. Her fingertips grazed the edge of her binder, but she didn't turn a page. She didn't need to. She had already won round one, and everyone knew it. Behind her, conservative staffers buzzed with restrained energy. Phones lit up. The line, "Your policies made the border a disaster zone," was already circulating, clipped by partisan influencers and pundits alike. Within 15 minutes, Newsmax had posted the exchange with a caption that read, "Karoline Leavitt schools Jasmine Crockett on border reality." Chairman Jordan leaned in, trying to bring order back. "Let's return to the question of digital censorship. Ms. Leavitt, if you could—" But before he could finish, Representative Maxwell Frost, another progressive firebrand, broke in. "Chairman, I move to strike Ms. Leavitt's inflammatory remarks from the record," he said, his voice a little too eager. "They're not relevant to the subject matter, and frankly, they border on hate speech." Gasps rippled across the room. Karoline raised her eyebrows ever so slightly. "Hate speech?" she said, not needing the microphone to sound clear. "For telling the truth?" Jasmine sat up, finally speaking again. Her voice was low, but sharp. "You're not here to speak truth. You're here to trigger a moment." Karoline turned to her directly. "I didn't come here for a moment. I came here for a movement." That line silenced even Frost. Her voice had the clarity of conviction, not performance. It wasn't rage-fueled nor smug. It was something harder to dismiss. It was calm. It was grounded. And it came from a place no one could touch. Jasmine couldn't match that tone. Not now. Not after retreating just moments earlier. So she did what most cornered politicians do when they sense momentum slipping away. She pivoted. "Well then, Ms. Leavitt," she said, gesturing toward the stack of documents on Karoline's side of the desk. "Since you're here to educate us all, explain why your administration continues to oppose platforms taking down hate-based misinformation?" Karoline didn't flinch. "Because the term hate has become so politicized, it now means opinions the left doesn't like." Jasmine rolled her eyes. "So when someone denies election results or questions vaccines, that's not dangerous?" Karoline leaned in slightly. "Questioning power has never been dangerous in America. Silencing those who do, that's what's dangerous." The room shifted again. She turned toward the gallery, locking eyes with a reporter. Ask the New York Post how dangerous it felt when they were locked out of Twitter for covering a laptop. Ask those suspended for quoting the CDC when the science changed a week later. Ask yourself, who decides what counts as truth? Because if it's you, if it's her, she pointed to Jasmine, then we don't have truth anymore. We have a regime. And just like that, the room wasn't breathing. Jasmine opened her mouth, but said nothing. The air thickened again, less combative now, more contemplative. Like everyone in the room realized the conversation had turned into something far larger than two women sparring for airtime. Chairman Jordan finally cleared his throat, this time with more gravitas. "Ms. Leavitt, thank you. Please proceed with your testimony." Karoline turned the page in her binder. Her hands were steady. She hadn't just silenced the room. She'd taken control of the narrative. And they all knew it wasn't over yet. Karoline adjusted the microphone, her fingertips never shaking, her presence more commanding now than ever. In just 20 minutes, she had transformed from a young press secretary many thought was a political accessory into the central force of a nationally broadcast hearing. And Jasmine? Once the room's dominant progressive voice, she sat in uncharacteristic stillness, caught between pride and pause. "Let's talk about consistency," Karoline began, flipping to a new tab in her binder. "Because if we're going to sit here and argue over what's misinformation and what's not, we should probably start by looking in the mirror." She held up a screenshot, a tweet from Representative Jasmine Crockett, dated 2 years earlier. "This post," Karoline said, her voice steady, was flagged by community notes for falsely attributing a quote to President Trump. Yet it's still up, still retweeted by your account, and still defended. But when conservatives make a factual statement about, say, biological differences in sports, they get banned. A murmur swelled in the audience. Jasmine's eyes widened. Her lips pressed tightly. She hadn't expected this level of preparation. "You went back 2 years to find a tweet?" Jasmine scoffed, finally regaining her voice. "Is that how desperate you are to score points?" Karoline smiled faintly. "No, Congresswoman. I came prepared. That's what happens when you actually respect the platform you're invited to." Laughter bubbled from behind the camera row. Even members of the press smirked behind their tablets. Jasmine shot a glance at Chairman Jordan, hoping for a redirect, but he stayed silent. The moment was Karoline's. "You call me a mouthpiece," Karoline continued, voice now layered with fire, "but I've stood at that White House podium more times than you've stood on this floor. I've taken questions, handled crises, and represented a president you claim is a threat to democracy. But here's what threatens democracy more than Trump: people in power deciding who's allowed to speak." That line wasn't just sharp, it was surgical. It sliced through every Democratic argument on censorship without a raised voice. Jasmine stood up slowly. "Okay," she said, hands on the table. "You want to play this game? Let's talk about Charlottesville. Let's talk about January 6th. You speak for the same man who said 'very fine people' and watched the Capitol fall under the flag of his name." Karoline didn't rise to the bait. She simply turned a page. "Charlottesville," she said, "I thought we were talking about online censorship, but since you want to pivot, fine. President Trump condemned the extremists in that event multiple times, but your side clipped half a sentence and ran it for 4 years. That's not justice. That's media malpractice." Jasmine's voice rose. "You're defending the indefensible." Karoline's voice didn't rise with hers. That was her power. Controlled rage. Strategic calm. "I'm defending truth," she said, "even when it's inconvenient." The committee room was boiling under the surface. Staffers, interns, aides, reporters, everyone sensed it. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It was the televised rise of a new political heavyweight. And it wasn't Jasmine Crockett. It was Karoline Leavitt. She closed the binder gently and folded her hands. "Congresswoman," she said, voice poised, "you asked me earlier, who even are you? Maybe next time, before asking that question, you'll do your homework." The audience didn't need to clap. The silence was louder than any standing ovation. As the hearing moved into its final phase, something unspoken lingered in the air. Karoline Leavitt had come into the chamber as a press secretary, but she now sat with the posture of someone who knew the balance had tipped. Jasmine Crockett tried to regain her edge. She leaned into her mic, voice thin but defensive. "You've made your point, Ms. Leavitt, loudly, but one viral moment doesn't equal credibility." Karoline's eyes didn't waver. "No, Congresswoman," she replied calmly. "Credibility comes from standing firm when it's easier to stay quiet. I've made a career of that." Crockett exhaled sharply, searching her notes for a retort. But her rhythm had cracked. The room, the crowd, even her allies, were no longer reacting to her cadence. They were listening for Karoline. Chairman Jordan asked if any final remarks were needed before recess. Karoline rose, not rushed, not boastful, deliberate. She faced the dais. "Earlier, I was asked a question not about policy, but identity. I'd like to give the American people a fuller answer." Cameras panned in. Staffers stilled. The mood changed again. Karoline's voice remained low, composed. "That question, 'Who even are you?' was meant to diminish me, to suggest I didn't belong in this room. But here's the truth. I do. And I'm not alone. Millions of Americans feel like they don't belong in the spaces they help fund, build, and believe in." A pause. Not for drama, but for weight. And every time someone tries to mock, erase, or silence them, people like me will rise. Because our voice isn't a trend. It's a movement. The words landed like a gavel of their own. Jasmine didn't speak. She looked away. Outside the hearing room, the quote was already on X. Clips were spreading with captions like, "She didn't just answer. She owned the room." And Karoline? She wasn't finished. Karoline sat back down, but her words were still echoing through the chamber. The weight of her closing remarks hadn't just silenced the room, it had shifted it. Jasmine Crockett, now noticeably quieter, kept her hands folded on the desk. Her eyes flicked to Karoline for a brief second, then returned to her notes. She didn't speak. Chairman Jordan cleared his throat, sensing the mood had changed. "Thank you, Ms. Leavitt. We'll take a short recess before final remarks." The committee members slowly rose. Some Republican staffers quietly approached Karoline, shaking her hand. Others simply nodded in respect. No one tried to joke. No one tried to interrupt. She had turned the hearing into something bigger than politics. It had become personal for millions watching at home. Outside the chamber, the world was already reacting. On social media, the soundbite, "Our voice isn't a trend, it's a movement," had gone viral. Conservative influencers dubbed her the next great communicator. Even moderate voices were sharing the clip, noting her control and clarity. One popular independent journalist tweeted, "That wasn't just testimony. That was a masterclass in composure under fire." In the hallway, Karoline walked with the poise of someone who had done what she came to do. A reporter called out, "Ms. Leavitt, any regrets from today's hearing?" She stopped, smiled faintly, and replied, "None. Only that it took this long for people to listen." Jasmine exited 10 minutes later, surrounded by aides who spoke in hushed tones. She kept her head high, but her energy had shifted. She offered a few brief comments to a liberal outlet. "We came here to discuss serious issues. Unfortunately, it became a performance." But it lacked punch. The momentum was gone. Back in the hearing room, as lawmakers returned, Karoline remained calm. She adjusted her notes. She was no longer defending her presence. She was defining the future, and the country had already decided. They wanted to hear more. By nightfall, the hearing was no longer a headline. It was a phenomenon. News outlets scrambled to catch up. Fox News aired the clip in prime time, accompanied by commentary labeling Karoline's exchange a defining generational moment. Even political opponents privately acknowledged she hadn't just held her ground, she'd shifted it. Online, the response was overwhelming. The hashtag number "Who Even Are You" climbed to the top of X's trending chart, overtaking celebrity gossip and breaking news. But the tag wasn't mocking Karoline, it was exalting her. The question that was meant to belittle her had been turned into a battle cry. One viral video juxtaposed Jasmine Crockett's original remark with Karoline's poised response. In under an hour, it had over 4 million views. Another TikTok stitched together young women in classrooms, offices, and college dorms, saying Karoline's name with pride. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, I earned it." Influencers picked it up. So did church groups. So did political organizers across red states and swing districts alike. The message was clear. Karoline hadn't just clapped back, she had connected. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's team went into damage control. Advisors released a statement to left-leaning media outlets emphasizing decorum and respect for congressional process. But it came across defensive, dismissive, a response to a fire they had accidentally started. Karoline's team didn't issue a statement. They didn't need to. She had said it all in one line, delivered not in anger but with unshakable calm. "I'm here because I earned it." Trump's inner circle noticed. One senior advisor sent a text to Karoline's chief of staff. "The boss loved it, said she's sharper than half the House." Inside conservative circles, the ripple was turning into a wave. Leaders from Turning Point USA, the Heritage Foundation, and several key GOP fundraising committees reached out. She wasn't just seen as a spokesperson anymore, she was seen as a future. And yet Karoline didn't tweet, didn't boast, didn't spike the ball. Instead, she reviewed her notes from the hearing one more time. Her binder sat neatly on her desk. She highlighted the final paragraph she hadn't even needed to read aloud. Because some truths don't require volume, just clarity. 3 days after the hearing, Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the stage of a grassroots summit in Tampa, Florida. The crowd, mostly young conservatives, erupted before she even said a word. They weren't cheering for a press secretary anymore. They were rallying around a symbol. She waited for the noise to settle, then approached the mic with a calm, steady smile. "Some people still ask the question," she said. "Who even are you?" A wave of laughter and applause rippled through the hall. Karoline held up a hand, not to silence them, but to hold the moment. "I'm someone who got told I didn't belong, that I was too young, too outspoken, too conservative. I've been dismissed by networks, belittled by institutions, and told I'd never last." She looked across the sea of faces. Many wore shirts with her quote printed across the front. "I'm here because I earned it. But I'm still here," she continued. "Not because I shouted the loudest, but because I didn't back down." The hearing had changed everything. Politico ran a piece titled, "Leavitt's Moment. A Star is Forged on the Hill." Breitbart declared her the new face of unapologetic conservatism. Even moderate analysts noted her poise, her command, her precision. Jasmine Crockett's name had faded from the headlines. Her question was remembered only because Karoline turned it into a defining answer. And while the media dissected what came next, Senate run, governor, even VP speculation, Karoline stayed focused. That night, after the summit, she walked alone onto a quiet hotel balcony, binder in hand. Inside were all her notes from the hearing, highlighted, annotated, dog-eared, but the last page was blank. She stared at it for a moment. Then, slowly, she picked up a pen and wrote, "Never let anyone question your right to be heard. Turn their doubt into your direction." Below it, she signed, KL in Washington. Her name was being spoken in new tones, with caution, with admiration, with strategy. The question had been asked, the answer had echoed, and now, the next chapter was hers to write. They tried to mock her. They tried to silence her. But Karoline didn't just answer the question. She turned it into a movement. Jasmine Crockett asked, "Who even are you?" And Karoline Leavitt stood tall, not just for herself, but for every voice that's ever been dismissed, every young woman told to wait her turn, every conservative silenced by the system. She didn't flinch, she didn't fold, she faced the fire, and she owned the room. This wasn't just a clash, it was a shift, a signal to the old guard. There's a new generation rising, and they're not asking for permission. They're taking the mic. If you felt the power of her words, if you saw the truth in her calm, then you are part of that shift. Subscribe now, because this is only the beginning.